This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that believes silence is control. And what happens when silence stops working? Somewhere, a government decided that information was more dangerous than anger. That visibility was more lethal than dissent. So it reached for the oldest tool in the modern state, force, applied in the dark. When a system turns off the lights, it is not hiding from the world. It is testing something. It is testing whether power still flows downward or whether it has already begun to leak outward. You are being told this is chaos. You are being shown images meant to shock you. But the real danger is quieter than that, because when a state uses violence to preserve itself, it triggers reactions it can no longer schedule or contain. Stay with me. This story does not end where you think it does. And if you stop watching now, you miss the moment where control quietly slips. And that's where this actually begins. What actually controls this system now is not ideology, not loyalty, not even fear. It is momentum. At a certain point, large systems stop responding to intention. They respond to inertia. Orders are issued not to solve problems, but to keep the machinery moving one more night, one more hour. Power, at this stage, is no longer about persuasion. It is about throughput. How quickly force can be deployed, how completely information can be sealed, how long consequences can be delayed. This is why focusing on leaders misses the point. Remove one figure, and the system does not stop. It compensates. The real control mechanism here is the belief that escalation restores authority, that if pressure increases fast enough, resistance collapses. But systems built on that assumption share a fatal flaw. They cannot slow down without admitting weakness, and they cannot accelerate without triggering outside forces. That tension between internal collapse and external exposure is now the system itself. And once that balance tips, it does not tip gently. Which brings us to what quietly changed long before anyone noticed. For a long time, this system relied on something subtler than violence. Delay, exhaustion, the slow wearing down of attention before pressure was managed in increments, small arrests, limited crackdowns, temporary restrictions that could later be lifted and forgotten. That model depended on one assumption, that people would eventually disengage. That time favored the state, but something shifted. Quietly. Control stopped being elastic. It became brittle. Instead of absorbing pressure, the system began to react instantly. Instead of calibrating response, it escalated by default. Every challenge was treated as existential. Every night became decisive. This is the most dangerous phase for any authority because gradual tools no longer work, but catastrophic tools remain. Slow change is harder to see than sudden collapse and far more lethal. By the time violence becomes the primary language, it is already compensating for something lost. Legitimacy, predictability, internal cohesion. What you are witnessing is not a crackdown. It is a system discovering too late that restraint is no longer an option it trusts. And once restraint disappears, the next test arrives quickly, and it arrives with consequences. Then the shock arrived, not as an announcement, not as a declaration, but as a sudden change in pattern. One night, injuries looked one way. The next night, they didn't. Hospitals that had been dealing with crowd control harm were suddenly overwhelmed by wounds that belonged to a different category altogether, the kind of injuries that do not disperse crowds. They erase them. This is how you know a line has been crossed, not because officials say so, but because professionals trained to recognize damage, see something new, and stop calling it policing. At a certain hour, one force steps back, another steps forward. Heavier, less restrained, less reversible. This is not about restoring order. It is about ending motion. Bodies accumulate faster than systems can process them. Records lag reality. Silence expands. You are told this is temporary. You are told this will stabilize things. But when a system introduces tools it cannot publicly justify, it creates evidence it must permanently hide. That is why the lights went out. And once the lights are out, the system is no longer just managing dissent, it is managing what comes after, and that is where the real danger begins. Here is the part that is hardest to see while it is happening. What looks like chaos is actually coordination. Not perfect, not elegant, but intentional. When information disappears, damage does not. It is simply rerouted. Orders move inward. Consequences move outward. At the center, decisions are simplified. Escalate fast. Centralize responsibility. Compress time. At the edges, cost is diffused. Families absorb loss. Doctors absorb evidence. Communities absorb fear. This is how the system protects itself. Not by denying harm, by redistributing it downward and outward until no single moment appears decisive. Those who benefit are insulated by layers. They do not see the bodies. They see compliance metrics, stability indicators, silence. Those who absorb the damage do so privately. In hospitals, in morgues, in homes with the lights off. But there is a flaw in this mechanism. It assumes the damage remains local. It assumes silence does not travel. When internal suppression reaches a certain scale, it creates signals that escape containment, leaks, defections, external attention that cannot be rolled back. The system can hide evidence. It cannot hide acceleration. And acceleration invites observers. Observers become actors. And once outside forces start responding, the system is no longer just enforcing order. It is provoking a reaction it cannot fully predict. Which leads us to the second shock. And this one moves faster. Then pressure came from a different direction, not from the streets. From the perimeter, movement increased. Statements hardened. Economic signals shifted tone. This is what escalation looks like before it has a name. When violence reaches a scale that cannot be ignored, response begins indirectly. First with words, then with conditions, then with penalties that touch money, fuel, access, not war. Not yet, something colder. Markets react faster than diplomats. Supply chains notice before voters do. And once commerce is threatened, neutrality erodes quickly. At the same time, messaging changes. Support becomes public. Warnings become explicit. The language of patience disappears. Inside the system, this is read as confirmation. That pressure works. That force produces leverage. But this is the miscalculation. External pressure does not slow internal violence. It compresses time. Options narrow. Off-ramps close. Every move begins to feel final. Jets reposition. Meetings are canceled. Signals are sent without explanation. Nothing has happened yet. And that is the problem. Because when multiple actors prepare simultaneously, control no longer belongs to any one of them. The system wanted silence. Instead, it triggered synchronization. And synchronized systems do not de-escalate on command. They wait for the next trigger. And that trigger does not have to be intentional. At this point, this stops being abstract. Because the system does not experience risk. You do. You experience it when prices move without explanation. When access narrows quietly. When decisions made far away begin showing up in ordinary places. This is what systemic failure feels like from the inside. Not like collapse, like compression. You are not watching instability. You are living inside its early effects. When states escalate, they do not ask permission from civilians. They pass the cost downward into households, into jobs, into futures that suddenly feel less predictable than they did a week ago. And the most dangerous part is this. You are told none of this concerns you. Until it does, that is how these moments work. They expand invisibly. They connect quietly. If you are still here, it means you understand something important. This is not about sympathy. It is about exposure. Pay attention to how fast this is moving. Notice how many systems are now reacting at once. Because once ordinary life starts absorbing geopolitical shock, reversal becomes difficult. Stay with me. What happens next is no longer contained to one place. Once this reaches a certain velocity, geography stops protecting anyone because systems are no longer isolated. They are layered, energy routes tighten, trade assumptions wobble. Alliances are forced to clarify positions they preferred to leave vague. What begins as internal repression does not stay internal. It migrates through markets, through shipping lanes, through diplomatic language that suddenly grows sharper. Other governments are now reacting not to morality, but to risk. Risk of instability, risk of contagion, risk of being caught unprepared when a system breaks faster than expected. This is how local violence becomes a global variable. You can see it in how quickly calculations change. Who can still trade? Who must pause? Who starts preparing for scenarios they were publicly denying weeks ago? No one announces this phase. There is no headline for it. But once multiple systems begin adjusting simultaneously, the world becomes less forgiving. Small missteps carry larger consequences. Signals are misread. Silence is interpreted as strategy, and this is the moment when restraint matters most, and is least likely to appear. Because when too many actors are moving at once, no single one feels responsible for stopping, which leaves us facing what comes next. Not resolution, acceleration. From here, the system has three possible paths, not outcomes. Trajectories. The first is adjustment. Pressure is redistributed. Violence is quietly reduced. External actors accept partial compliance in exchange for stability. Nothing is fixed, but momentum slows. This path requires coordination, restraint, and time. Three things already in short supply. The second path is erosion. The system holds, but only barely. Force remains constant, sanctions deepen, leakage increases, life becomes narrower, harsher, more brittle. No collapse, no resolution, just a prolonged grinding down that destabilizes everything around it. And then there is rupture. This is the path no one publicly plans for. It begins when one signal is misread. One response comes too fast. One internal action triggers an external reaction that cannot be walked back. Rupture does not arrive as a decision. It arrives as a cascade. Once that cascade starts, control becomes performative. Everyone insists they are managing the situation. While preparing for consequences they can no longer prevent. Right now, all three paths are still possible. Which one dominates depends on timing, restraint, and perception. And here is the danger. Acceleration favors the path that requires the least coordination, and the least coordination always wins first. We are now closer to that threshold than most systems are willing to admit. And that brings us to the final question. Not what will happen, but whether anyone can still slow it down. There is a reason this moment feels unresolved. Because it is. Systems rarely announce when they are about to fail. They continue operating, issuing statements, moving resources, pretending optionality still exists. What you are watching is not the end of a story. It is the narrowing of choices. From the inside, it looks like control. From the outside, it looks like inevitability. Both can be true at the same time, and this is where attention matters. Not because watching changes outcomes, but because disengagement guarantees miscalculation. The most dangerous phase of escalation is not when violence peaks. It is when decision makers believe momentum will protect them. If you want certainty, you will not find it here. If you want comfort, this is the wrong place. What comes next will be shaped by signals most people never see. Moves made quietly. Responses delayed just long enough to feel deliberate. Stay engaged. Follow the mechanics, not the noise. Because the next phase will not arrive as a shock. It will arrive as a continuation. And by the time it has a name, the window to influence it will already be closing. If you want to understand what systems do when restraint fails completely, that's what we examine next. Don't look away now.